I'm Tiffany, a 23-year-old woman whose life was rather simple until lately. Since my mother died of aggressive illness a few years ago, the house I received from my grandmother, my mom's mother, has served as my shelter. My dad and I were the only ones left when Mom passed away. I made it a point to go see him every Friday after work, even though he lives on the opposite side of the city and the drive is terrible. We made it into a small custom. We would spend the evening watching old movies and talking about Mom's recollections while I brought his favorite takeout. I treasured those nights as a means of honoring her memory and maintaining my relationship with Dad. But one of those Friday trips was when it all changed. I expected our typical calm evening when I arrived at Dad's house as usual, bringing his favorite Chinese food. Rather, I discovered him pacing the living room anxiously. He wasn't by himself either. He gestured to a lovely woman seated on the couch and said, "Tiffany, honey, there's someone I want you to meet." She appeared to be about 35 years old, professionally attired, with her hair done and her smile perfected. "This is Rachel. She is my fiancée, to be precise." I almost dropped the bags for takeout. Engaged. Dad had never even discussed dating, much less taken seriously enough to pop the question. I had a brief spike in rage. How did he forget about Mom so fast? Then I realized what I was doing. Dad deserved to be happy, didn't he, considering Mom had been dead for a few years. Rachel got to her feet and held out her hand. Her words were kind. "I've heard so much about you, Tiffany," she added. "Your father talks about you all the time." I shook her hand and attempted a smile. I managed to say, "Nice to meet you," despite the fact that my mind was full of questions. The evening proceeded awkwardly at first, but as we ate and talked, I started to relax a bit. Rachel seemed nice enough, and it was obvious how much Dad adored her. He kept looking at her with those puppy dog eyes, and she'd touch his arm or shoulder occasionally in a way that seemed natural and affectionate. Just as I was starting to feel better about the situation, Rachel dropped another bombshell, so casually you'd think she was commenting on the weather. "Oh, by the way," she said while helping Dad clear the dinner plates, "my boys will be so excited to meet you. They're 6 and 8, such wonderful ages." I nearly choked on my water. Boys. She had children. Something about the way she delivered this information, like an afterthought, bothered me. But I pushed the feeling aside. After all, this was a lot to process in one evening. "That's great," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I look forward to meeting them." As I drove home that night, my mind was spinning. In the space of one evening, my quiet, predictable life with just me and Dad had transformed into something completely different. Things moved quickly after that first meeting. Before I knew it, Rachel and her sons, Tommy and Jake, had moved into Dad's house. The boys were pretty much what you'd expect from kids their age, running around, making noise, throwing occasional tantrums, but also having their sweet moments. Tommy, the older one, was into video games, while Jake, the younger one, couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes. 4 months flew by, and suddenly there was a wedding to plan. Rachel threw herself into the preparations with an intensity that was almost scary. She had opinions about everything: the flowers, the venue, the music, even the exact shade of tablecloths. "Tiffany, sweetie," she'd call me, her voice dripping with honey, "would you mind watching the boys for a couple of hours? I have an emergency meeting with the florist." Or, "The cake tasting got rescheduled last minute. Could you please keep an eye on Tommy and Jake?" I didn't mind at first. It was only for a few hours here and there, and the kids were manageable in short doses. Besides, I wanted to show Dad I was trying to make this work. Then came the wedding day. The ceremony started well enough. The boys were cleaned up and on their best behavior, sitting quietly in their little suits. But as the reception dragged on, they got restless. I was sitting at my table, picking at my dinner, when I saw Tommy start flicking peas at his brother with a spoon. "Hey, guys," I said firmly, walking over to their table. "That's enough. You're going to hit someone." Jake had already grabbed his own spoon and was retaliating with mashed potatoes. "Cut it out," I warned them. "This isn't appropriate behavior." That's when Rachel materialized out of nowhere. Her perfectly manicured hand clamped down on my arm like a vice, and she practically dragged me behind one of the decorative pillars. "Don't you ever speak to my children like that again," she hissed, her face twisted with anger. Gone was the sweet, smiling woman I'd known for the past few months. They were throwing food at other guests. I tried to explain, rubbing my arm where she grabbed me. I was just trying to prevent a scene. "Listen to me very carefully," she cut me off, her voice low and harsh. "These are my children. You have absolutely no right to discipline them. When you have your own kids, if you ever have your own kids, then you can play mommy all you want. But until then, keep your mouth shut." Before I could respond, she'd plastered that fake smile back on her face and swanned back to the reception, cooing over Dad and charming the guests like nothing had happened. The changes started just a few days after the wedding. It was like Rachel had been waiting for that ring on her finger to show her true colors. That Friday I drove to Dad's house as usual, fighting through rush hour traffic for over an hour. I had picked up Dad's favorite lasagna from Tony's, the restaurant he and Mom used to go to on their anniversaries. But the moment I walked through the door, something felt different. Rachel was lounging on the couch, our couch, where Mom and Dad used to sit, scrolling through her phone while the boys chased each other around the living room. She looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as annoyed. "Oh, Tiffany, you should really call before coming over." I stood there with the takeout bag in my hand, feeling like an intruder in the house I grew up in. "Call? But Dad and I always spend Friday evenings together. It's our tradition." Rachel sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing. "Well, things are different now. Your father has a family." The way she emphasized family made my stomach turn. "And I'll be the one establishing new traditions around here." I looked at Dad, who was sitting in his armchair, pretending to be absorbed in his tablet. He didn't say a word, didn't even look up. The father who used to stand up to anyone who upset me, who taught me to always speak my mind, just sat there in silence. Then Rachel's face suddenly lit up with delight. "But since you're here," she said, standing up and grabbing her purse, "and you brought dinner, this is perfect. Your father and I have been wanting to try that new Italian place downtown. We can have a proper date night and you can watch the boys." Before I could even process what was happening, she was pulling Dad up from his chair. "Come on, honey, let's get changed." 10 minutes later, they were gone. Just like that. No asking if I was free. No checking if I had plans. The lasagna I'd brought for Dad and me was being devoured by Tommy and Jake, who were arguing over who got the bigger piece. The next 3 hours were a blur of breaking up fights, preventing them from jumping off furniture, and trying to keep them from destroying the house. By the time Dad and Rachel finally came home around 11:00 p.m., I was exhausted. "Oh, we had such a wonderful evening," Rachel gushed, not even looking at the mess the boys had made. "We're absolutely exhausted, though. Boys, time for bed?" She herded them upstairs without so much as a thank you to me. Then she turned back, stifling an obviously fake yawn. "Well, it's getting quite late, isn't it? You should probably head home, Tiffany. You have quite a drive ahead of you." The following week, things got even worse. Rachel, who didn't work and spent her days managing the household, Her words started showing up at my house unannounced with the boys in tow. "I have an emergency mani-pedi appointment," she'd say, already backing toward her car. Or, "Your father's taking me to that new French bistro. The boys hate French food. We'll pick them up in a few hours." She didn't ask. She didn't even pretend to ask anymore. She'd just drop them off and leave like I was some kind of on-call babysitting service. Sometimes she'd show up right as I got home from work, still in my office clothes, too tired to argue. Finally, after weeks of this nonsense, I snapped. It was a Wednesday evening, and I had just finished a brutal day at work involving 3 client presentations and a system crash that lost me 2 hours of progress. All I wanted was to take a hot shower and collapse on my couch. Instead, I pulled into my driveway to find Rachel's SUV parked there, with her already unloading the boys and their backpacks. "Perfect timing," she chirped, pushing Tommy toward my front door. "I have a spa appointment and then dinner with your father. They'll need dinner in about an hour." "No," I said firmly, still standing by my car. "I wasn't hired to be your personal babysitter." "I'm tired, I've had a long day, and I didn't agree to this." Her face turned an interesting shade of red. "How dare you?" she snapped, grabbing both boys by their arms and practically yanking them back toward her car. "Boys, get in the car," she said sharply, then turned to glare at me. "You'll regret this attitude, Tiffany." She peeled out of my driveway so fast she left tire marks. I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and had just started to relax when my phone rang. It was Dad. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he barked before I could even say hello. "How dare you speak to my wife that way? She's in tears." "Dad, wait." "No, you wait. You're being cruel and selfish. I won't tolerate you treating my wife like this. She's been nothing but kind to you. Dad, please, just listen." But he'd already hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. That was the first time in my life my father had ever spoken to me that way. A week passed with no contact from either of them. Part of me was hurt, but another part was relieved to have some peace and quiet. When Friday rolled around, I treated myself to take out and a bottle of wine, looking forward to a quiet evening alone. I was getting out of my car when I heard noises coming from inside my house. My heart started racing. Had someone broken in? I was reaching for my phone to call the police when I heard what was definitely children laughing. What the hell? I unlocked my front door with shaking hands and found Tommy and Jake sprawled on my living room floor, surrounded by empty snack packages and juice boxes. The TV was blaring cartoons, and there were crumbs everywhere. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. Tommy shrugged, not even looking away from the TV. "Mom dropped us off like 4 hours ago. She used the key to let us in and said we could eat whatever we wanted and watch TV." The key. Of course. I'd given Dad a spare key right after I moved in case of emergencies. "When is she coming back?" I asked, dreading the answer. "She's not," Jake piped up cheerfully. "She and your dad left for their honeymoon in Hawaii. They'll be gone for 2 weeks. I stood in my living room staring at the 2 boys who had been left alone in my house for 4 hours. Anything could have happened to them. They could have hurt themselves, started a fire, or God knows what else. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. Before dialing Rachel's number, I opened my recording app and hit start. Something told me I needed to document this conversation. The phone rang and rang and rang. Finally, on what must have been the 10th ring, Rachel picked up. "What do you want?" she snapped. I could hear waves in the background. "We're trying to check into our hotel." What do I want? I fought to keep my voice steady. How about explaining why you broke into my house and abandoned your children here without even asking me? Rachel's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, please, don't be so dramatic. I used a key, so it's hardly breaking in, and it's not like you have anything better to do. Excuse me. Well, let's be honest, Tiffany. You're just sitting at home alone anyway. No boyfriend, no social life, no family of your own. Consider this practice for when you finally manage to find someone willing to start a family with you. Before I could respond, she hung up. I immediately called Dad, my hands now shaking with rage. He picked up on the second ring. What is it, Tiffany? He sounded annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. We're trying to start our honeymoon. Dad, Rachel left her kids alone in my house. She broke in while I was at work and... Stop making mountains out of molehills, he cut me off. You're always trying to create drama. Can't you just let us enjoy our honeymoon in peace? I'm at work all day, I practically shouted. I can't watch her kids. I have responsibilities, meetings, deadlines. Then hire a babysitter, he said dismissively. It's not that complicated. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. If it's that simple, why didn't you hire a babysitter before running off to Hawaii? We got a last-minute deal on the tickets, he replied, like that explained everything. There wasn't time to make arrangements. Look, I have to go. Rachel's waiting. Click. I stood there, staring at my phone, barely able to process what had just happened. My father, who had once grounded me for a week because I forgot to call when I was going to be 10 minutes late coming home from school, thought it was perfectly fine to abandon 2 young children in an empty house for hours. That's when I noticed Tommy sprawled on my couch, tapping away at his smartphone. A thought suddenly hit me. Hey, Tommy, I called out, trying to keep my voice casual. Do you have your dad's phone number? Your real dad, I mean. Tommy barely looked up from his game. Yeah, we talk to him all the time. Want me to show you? He pulled up his contacts and showed me the screen. I quickly copied the number into my phone, my heart pounding. I stepped into my home office for privacy and dialed. The phone rang twice before a deep voice answered. Hello. Hi, is this Mr. Anderson? I took a deep breath. You don't know me, but I'm Tiffany, Rachel's new stepdaughter. I'm calling because, well, there's a situation with Tommy and Jake that you should know about. What kind of situation? His voice immediately sharpened with concern. Are they okay? I told him everything. How Rachel had been using me as free childcare. How she'd broken into my house while I was at work. How she and my father had abandoned the boys for 4 hours before jetting off to Hawaii. As I spoke, I could hear his breathing getting heavier. Text me your address, he said firmly. I'll be there in an hour. And Tiffany, thank you for calling me. True to his word, exactly 1 hour later, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found a tall man in his early 40s. Behind him stood another man in an expensive-looking suit carrying a leather briefcase. Dad, Tommy and Jake shouted in unison, running to hug him. He wrapped them both in a bear hug, and I could see the relief on his face. Boys, why don't you go pack up your things, he suggested, ruffling their hair. And clean up any mess you made in Miss Tiffany's house. As the boys scurried around collecting their belongings, he turned to me. This is James Carlton, my attorney, he said, gesturing to the man in the suit. Would you mind if we talked for a few minutes? We sat at my kitchen table while the boys cleaned up the living room. Mr. Anderson. Please call me Steve, he interrupted. Steve ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I've been dealing with Rachel's stunts for years, he said quietly, so the boys wouldn't hear. Missing scheduled visits, changing plans last minute, using the kids as pawns. But this? He shook his head. This is beyond anything she's done before. I pay $4,000 a month in child support, and she's using it to fly off to Hawaii while dumping the kids on strangers. Not to mention leaving them alone in an empty house, his lawyer added, pulling out a legal pad. Miss Taylor, would you mind telling me exactly what happened? Start from the beginning. I spent the next hour detailing everything. The wedding. The gradual escalation of Rachel's demands. Today's events. The lawyer took detailed notes, his frown deepening as I spoke. Oh, and I have this, I said, pulling out my phone. I recorded my conversations with both Rachel and my father from today. Would that be helpful? The lawyer's eyes lit up. Very helpful. Would you mind forwarding those recordings to me? After I sent him the files, he played them back, nodding as Rachel's condescending voice filled my kitchen. When the recordings finished, he looked at Steve. This is exactly what we needed, he said. Abandonment, endangerment, misuse of child support funds. Your ex-wife has handed us a golden opportunity. The next 2 weeks passed quietly. Not a single call or text from Rachel asking about her kids. Not even my dad checked in to see if everything was okay. They were apparently too busy enjoying their Hawaiian paradise to worry about the 2 young boys they'd abandoned in my house. Then came Friday. I'd just gotten home from work and changed into comfortable clothes when my front door burst open. Rachel stormed in like a hurricane, her face red with rage, my father right behind her. She was waving some kind of official-looking letter in her hand. Tommy, Jake, she screamed, looking around wildly. Where are my children? I stayed seated on my couch, surprisingly calm. They're with their father. Rachel froze. What? Their father. You know, the man you had children with before you married my dad. The one who actually cares about their well-being. She lunged at me, her perfectly manicured nails nearly catching my hair. You little snake, do you know what this is? She shook the letter in my face. This is a notice from family court. My ex-husband is suing for full custody. They're threatening to take away my parental rights. Maybe you should have thought about that before abandoning your kids in an empty house, I replied, standing up to face her. Or using them as pawns in your games, or spending their child support money on Hawaiian vacations. She turned to my father, clearly expecting him to defend her. He stepped forward, his face dark with anger. I never thought my own daughter could be so vindictive, he spat. You've destroyed your stepmother's family out of pure spite. As far as I'm concerned, you're no longer my daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. I didn't destroy anything, Dad. Rachel did that all by herself. Rachel let out another screech of rage and stormed out of my house. My father gave me one last disgusted look before following her. The custody hearing took place 3 weeks later. I sat in the witness box, feeling Rachel's glare burning into me as I calmly recounted everything that had happened. The abandonment, the breaking and entering, the casual disregard for her children's safety. When the lawyer played my recorded phone conversation with Rachel, her face went from red to white. Her dismissive laugh echoed through the courtroom. Consider this practice for when you finally manage to find someone willing to start a family with you. The judge's expression grew stormier with each piece of evidence. By the time I finished my testimony, Rachel was slumped in her chair, her previous arrogance completely deflated. The verdict came down like a hammer. Full custody awarded to Steve Anderson. Rachel's child support payments terminated immediately. A stern warning that any further instances of child endangerment would result in the complete termination of her parental rights. You'd think losing custody of her children would have humbled Rachel, but you'd be wrong. Instead, she and my father launched a campaign of harassment against me. My phone would blow up with messages calling me every name in the book. When I blocked their numbers, they started calling from different phones. When I blocked those, they began showing up at my house. They pound on my door at all hours, Rachel's shrill voice carrying through the neighborhood. "Open this door, you home-wrecking little." I tried to ignore them, but one day, after a particularly rough week at work, I'd had enough. When the banging started, something inside me snapped. I marched to the door and threw it open. "You want to talk? Fine. Let's talk." They stormed into my living room, Rachel immediately launching into a tirade about how I'd ruined her life, how she couldn't afford her spa treatments anymore without the child support money. How dare I interfere with her family? I let her rant for about 30 seconds before turning to my father. "Are you done?" "We're not done until," Rachel started, but I held up my hand. "I wasn't talking to you." I focused on my father. "Hey, Dad, remember Mom's house? The one you're living in right now." He blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change of topic. "You know, the house that Mom left to me in her will. The one I've been letting you live in rent-free out of the goodness of my heart." The color drained from his face. Rachel stopped mid-rent, her mouth hanging open. I stood up, drawing myself to my full height. "So here's what's going to happen." The harassment stops. The calls stop. The visits stop. Because if they don't, I'll evict you faster than Rachel here can say spa day. And then you can both try surviving on your salary alone with no free housing and no child support money to subsidize your lifestyle. I walked to the door and held it open. Mom would be ashamed of how you've acted. Now, get out of my house. Rachel grabbed her designer purse and stormed out. My father lingered for a moment, looking lost. Then he followed her without a word. That was 3 months ago. They haven't bothered me since. Through the family grapevine, I hear Rachel's making my father's life hell, constantly complaining about their reduced circumstances now that she can't spend her kids' support payments on herself. Apparently, they can barely afford their lifestyle on just my father's modest salary. I ran into my cousin Sarah at the grocery store last week. She told me Rachel's been throwing tantrums about having to shop at regular stores instead of her beloved boutiques. "My father looks tired all the time now," she said, "like he's aged years in just a few months." Do I feel bad? Honestly, no. My father chose this. He chose to stand by and watch while his wife abused my kindness. He chose to say nothing when she abandoned her children in my house. He chose to disown me rather than admit she was wrong. I don't regret what I did. Standing up for what's right might sometimes make you the antagonist in someone else's tale. That's fine with me. Even if it means losing my relationship with my father, I can sleep soundly at night knowing those guys are loved and safe. Postscript. I still own the house my father had. I haven't kicked him out yet, too. However, if they ever reopen, it's good to have that card in my back pocket.